Kevin and I agreed to tell our story because we kept finding a connection with other veterans and families, and we found they were experiencing the similar reintegration challenges that we were. And when we'd speak, we'd see a lot of head nodding of people saying, I know what you're talking about.
Next slide, please. The biggest mistake that I made coming home from Iraq 11 months ago was believing that I was exempt from any of the reintegration challenges. As a leader, as a commander, I had my focus on my soldiers, on my kids, and I was worried about them. And I listened to Chaplain Morris and his great sermons, and I listened to all the presentations. And every time I listened to them on how they applied to my soldiers, not to me, because I believed I was exempt. I was a leader. I have a loving wife of 24 years. I have a loving, supportive family, 2 boys that are well-adjusted boys. And I was going back to a job that I loved. I was passionate about my job, and I'd been there for over 20 years. So I believed I was exempt.
The biggest mistake I made was not reaching out to anybody and not realizing that others may be facing the same challenges that I was and my family. And part of that was to protect Kevin as a leader, and I didn't want my family and friends and his coworkers to know, hey, we are having troubles. And family and friends think that you should just be elated that you have your spouse back. And I didn't want to share with others that, you know what, some days I'm not so glad he's back. And they don't understand that.
Next slide. I like this picture because our reintegration challenges really began with a difference in expectations. And let me put it in this analogy. I was running a marathon. I was gone for 14 months. And my marathon, my finish line for my marathon was when I got home. When I walked in the door, when I went to the couch, and when I went and unloaded my bags and said, I made it. My soldiers made it. We're home. I've got a great sense of relief. I collapsed. I collapsed at the finish line. That's what happened, and it felt that's where I wanted to be. It was over. I had walked into my house. I had listened to Chaplain Morris, who said, don't go into your home and make any changes. Don't go in and change anything. Don't make any big decisions for a couple of weeks. They've been running it. Let them, So I was more than ready to do that. I was tired, and I just wanted to relax. And so I collapsed at the finish line, and I didn't reach out any hand to my wife for a baton.
I also had been running my own marathon at home and carrying that baton, and the end of my marathon was the second he walked in that door. So when he walked in that door and dropped that baton, I also dropped that baton. I was tired also. I didn't want to be making those decisions anymore. We had 2 teenage boys, and I was ready to turn all of that over to Kevin, who didn't want to take it.
So you can see there's a difference of expectations, and I wasn't there for her, and she wasn't following through on what I thought she was going to keep doing for us. And that wasn't so apparent to us right away. I mean, this is Monday morning quarterback stuff here, okay? When it was happening, I didn't realize it was happening.
Also, the family. I had to become more independent. That makes you more confident that you can do those things. You make all the decisions without having to ask anybody or bounce those off anybody. We established our own routine, which was very different than when Kevin was home. And the kids grew a year older, and when they were both teenagers, so 1 year made a huge difference. And those weren't the same boys he knew when he left. They were different when he came home.
Excellent. These are some of the problems, the challenges that I experienced as well as many soldiers that I've talked to. The first one I'll tell you is trying to find a sense of meaning, of importance in your daily life. Remember the warrior mentality that I talked about? I mean, you felt like you were important. You felt like your mission was important. You had adrenaline rush every day that affirmed the fact that you were doing something important when you were deployed. And now you're home. And now you're going back to the same old job. And now you're going back to something. And now you're living in a very low key compared to what you were facing there. To find meaning and a sense of importance in your daily life doesn't happen overnight, because you're missing something that you've become conditioned to for the last 18 months. You want to replace that daily adrenaline rush. And sometimes the choices our soldiers make to do that are the ones that get us further into trouble. The world, the society we live in every day, is a lot more complex over here than it is over there, because it's a very focused day. It's a very focused mission, and there are very few, as we talked about, very few distractions. We have a lot of order in our daily life as a soldier in the combat zone. We have a very sense of order. And you know what? We don't have that here. We live in a state of chaos, and it feels that way to us who are back. And for those who are just your common average civilian, you get used to it, living in that state of chaos every day. But it's more complex, and that's a huge adjustment to come home to. You have to learn to live in the gray again. You have an intolerance of those who haven't been there and who try to get in front of you and tell you something. It's there. And finally, I will say that you have difficulty finding that some of the problems you face at work or in the family are important. And I've realized now, Monday morning quarterback, that I did that to my wife. She would raise issues to me and say, we need to make a decision about this. We need this. And I look at her and say, this is not an issue. This is not an issue compared to the stuff I saw over there. I sit through meetings at work with my coworkers that I have great respect for, and I listen to passionate exchanges about things, and I say, this isn't important. Why are we wasting our time over this when we could be making a difference? I mean, and so that agitation you feel because you have seen things that don't match up to the things that seem little over here. Next slide.
You can imagine what that mentality did when he walked into our home. And things aren't important, and those decisions that we have to make just weren't important to Kevin. So his way of dealing with that was, I'm not going to make them. And I was tired of making all those decisions and always being the bad guy, and I wanted his support and help with that. He invaded our space. That was our home. We had our own routines, and he's now an outsider that's going to stay there. So it wasn't like your in-laws that you can send home. So it was a huge, huge adjustment. He also wanted to feel a part of that home again, so he decided to reorganize our house. Not a good idea. He would ask me, where is this? And I have no idea, wherever you put it, because I no longer know where anything in my house is. The black and white area, when you have two teenage boys, there's a huge gray area. And when they would want the car or something, there was a yes or a no, and then a huge outburst, because those decisions didn't go well. And it's, you need to work with these kids that you don't know anymore. I knew how far I could push them. He did not. And he would push to they were over the edge. And so it was a huge adjustment for him to find that gray area again where we negotiate. he was very short-fused, impatient. We talked about the decisions, and I never know when that was going to happen. Everything was going along great, and all of a sudden, he's very angry about something. And so we all kind of felt like we were walking on eggshells, not knowing when those little outbursts, which he never had before, would happen.
Next slide. This is our final slide, and it's here for a purpose, because the deployment and the reintegration experience that we had its challenges. There's no doubt about it. And the purpose of our story is to help you realize that the finish line isn't when they walk in the door. This finish line is probably going to have to be moved to the right a little bit. But I will tell you that this new normal that you've heard referred to a couple times can be a better normal. And we're experiencing that. And that better normal comes because, and I believe it comes from my perspective as a soldier, when you're in the face of struggles you face away from home for 14 months or 18 months or however long you're gone, and you face the struggles and the things that you see in the combat zone, you have a renewed focus and a sense of what is important in your life. And certainly family is right up there at the top. And with that, it can make a stronger new normal when you return home.